You guys ready? Ready to do this today? Okay, thank you for being here. Our first speaker is great colleagues from Colorado State University, Dr. Gregory Graff and Kathay Rennels. I'm going to read you their bios as they're coming up, and I'll cue up their presentation. Greg is an associate professor at Colorado State University in the Department of Agriculture and Resource Economics. His specialty is in economics of innovation and entrepreneurship and how industry changes in the face of new technologies. At CSU, he teaches courses on U.S. agricultural policy, on the global food system, and on technological change in agricultural production. And Greg and his family operate a small farm just outside Fort Collins, so you have to ask him what he grows or produces. Kathay Rennels, Assistant Vice President of Community and Economic Development at Colorado State University. She works in the Office of Engagement, Extension, and Regional Economics Institute to advance collaborative networks across the state and create economic development opportunities. As a former county commissioner in Larimer County and a state board representative, she has had significant experience fostering public and private partnerships in regional and workforce development. Kathay grew up on a ranch in Colorado and continues to ranch with her husband northwest of Fort Collins. So I think we'll hear some of her ranching stories in her presentation today. So help me welcome these two. And they are going to be tethered to this mic, so they'll tag team here.
Okay. Good morning. The only unfair part of tethered is I'm really short, so usually I try to stand there because all you see is a head, but that's okay. Good morning, and it's really delightful to be here. I think we want to move through our presentation rather quickly, but I need to give you a little frame as to where this came from. I was a commissioner for Larimer County for 12 years, and when I left office, went to work for Colorado State University. It's really unusual that someone would actually find a use for a politician after that long, but they actually did. So I was very grateful to go into the Office of Community Development and the Office of Engagement, looking at, with an ag university perspective, and seeing where that might lead us. About that time, Governor Hickenlooper was elected, and he wanted to start his blueprint tour, which is to ask every county, what are your economic drivers, what's holding you back? So I facilitated 7,500 people, 64 counties, then rolled them into regions. So along with a team from OEdit, putting all that together, we facilitated the conversation. Now, I have been born and raised in agriculture all my life. I was raised in Franktown, Colorado. I don't know how many of you know where Franktown is. My father bought that ranch for $14 an acre. That tells you how long ago we bought it. The last piece I sold was per square foot, and he would never believe that even if he came back. He would never believe it. He said, nobody will ever come here. We were in the first phase of that tour, and we were in Center, Colorado. Center, Colorado has an experiment station there with about $290 million worth of potatoes that go out of the San Luis Valley. Listening to the discussion, I looked at a friend of mine who's also in large production ag, and I said, do you realize agriculture hasn't been mentioned once in 30 counties as an economic driver? And water's been mentioned once as an issue. So I actually said, and if you're facilitating, you're not supposed to do that, I said, do you understand the economic value of the potato industry down here? They said, oh yeah, but ag's doing fine. We don't need to work on that. So as we went through the rest of the tour, we noticed that literally in the whole tour, ag wasn't mentioned first once. When we went back to the aggregating them as regions, ag came up twice and water came up twice. So when you go back and peel that away, and I will tell you it took me a couple months to peel away why that happened, the consensus was we have great food, we have great water, we have great quality of life. Why would we take the governor's resource and put it behind that when we really need infrastructure, broadband? Why would we do that? The other thing that you notice is we are 3 generations away from the land. So in Colorado, we have folks that don't even have a cousin on the land. So in many times that we give this presentation, if you ask people, do you live on the land? No hand comes up. Do you know someone? No hand comes up. So you're literally 3 generations away, which means that 2% of us, many of you in this room, work the land. That's a very small number. Look at the other number, 98% don't. And in that 98% that don't, there's a huge gap of generational misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about how the food system actually works. And I will tell you from this particular study that we've done, and the beauty of doing this study, I said, we need to get that bigger voice in this conversation. And the governor's office and Office of Economic Development said, well, we've never had a big picture of agriculture, but we don't know how to do it. So they said, we'd be happy to do that and make you an industry, but you got to do it because we don't know how to do it. This actually gave us the opportunity to bring wine and beer and distilling into this conversation. They're a grown crop. They use our water, but they were counted in manufacturing. So we actually were able to bring those in. And I think when you think of production ag and you think of ag, what you think of maybe 10 top things: wheat, corn, production. Greg and I had to stop at 200 different NEX codes. Each industry has a NEX code. We had to stop at 200 when you begin to figure out where is that fabric. So in talking to Greg and a lot of very wonderful people at the university, very diverse, from business to ag to fermentation science, Greg said, you don't need a supply chain because I know where my beef goes. You need a value chain. We need to figure out how this knits together. You know, it's kind of like going to a family reunion and looking over and saying, who is that? And you're like, well, she married him, divorced him. This is their son, and that's how we got back here. Well, she's part of your family, but you don't know quite how they got there. So as we went through this, the beauty of being on the governor's tour is we were able to take the 6 core objectives, and I'll touch those real quickly. You can certainly read them. But what that did is it said all 14 key industries have to look through this lens. It made small farmers, organic farmers, large production farmers, it made us all look through the same lens. We all need marketing, we all need workforce, we all need finance, and we all need innovation. So it gave a common fate to all of us. It gave us an opportunity to have a conversation without having a conversation about the pros and cons. It said we all are fragile in this area, and if we don't pay attention to it, and this is what came out of the end of that conversation, if we don't pay attention to it, the fragility of ag and food systems is what's at risk. So I'm going to turn this over to Greg. We will be available. So Greg, it's all yours. I stand over here because I have a cough, so I'll sit here and sit.
Thank you, Kathay, and good morning. It's really wonderful to be here with all of you. My job, as Adrian set me up, is to be the 35,000-foot guy. Well, Kathay, the 35,000-foot gal. She gives you the politics and the descriptive. I get to drag you through the numbers. I'm an agricultural and resource economist, and you heard a little bit of what I teach. And I'm going to try to cater to both those who are a bit more right-brained and picture-oriented and those who are a little bit more left-brained and numbers-oriented. But I'm going to try to go fairly quickly. And first, to take you on this tour of agriculture in the state of Colorado as maybe never presented before, I want to define for you what did I mean when we had that conversation about a value chain. And in essence, it's the value of all of the steps that it takes to go from a raw resource all the way to a final product or service that is going to be of value to someone in our economy and ultimately final consumers at the grocery store or the brew pub or the pet food store. And in particular, what we're doing is we're anchoring this exercise on those goods and services where at some point in the value chain they're going to pass across the land of someone in production agriculture, whether it's an operating farm or ranch. So that's how we're going to define it. But for convenience sake, we're following the USDA's definition of a farm operation for that. as stipulated back in the 2007 Census of Agriculture. I'm going to put this up as a flow chart for our initial foray through it. You can kind of think of this as an engineering flow chart or whatnot. As Kathay said, we're essentially summarizing here over 200 industry subsectors. I want to start down at the bottom with Colorado consumers. They are the foundation of the value chain. They are the ones who pull the money out of the wallet and put it down on the cash register counter saying, I value this product or service. Nothing has value without appealing to the consumers. And to begin our journey, most of the products and services are obtained from retailers within the state of Colorado. There's 5.1 million consumers, and we are purchasing just about $30 billion worth of product that involves agricultural production here in the state. Now that's at home, away from home food consumption, that's beverages, that's pet food, that's landscaping services. I'll detail those in a second. To put that some context around one of the big conversations that we're interested in today, here's the direct retail relationship between the farm and ranch sector, the producers, and final consumers. And these numbers are due to Dawn Thilmany, who you'll be hearing from next. But her latest estimates were that there's about 22 million in direct off-farm sales being branded as locally grown, and about another 66 million in terms of that kind of product that's being intermediated through some sort of a retail outlet. Compare those two sets of numbers. Next, Colorado retailers are deriving a significant amount of value from Colorado-based businesses. And this may be everything from food processors to food manufacturers, beverage manufacturers. Our estimate, and this may be a little bit highball, is close to $5 billion worth of product that is manufactured in Colorado, makes its way through the wholesale retail system on to Colorado consumers, primarily meat, fresh dairy, and products of that nature. But the thing that we really have to recognize is that we are an integrated open economy with the rest of the 49 United States as well as much of the globe. And the vast majority of the product that we make here in Colorado goes to consumers elsewhere. And our retailers have global supply chains, by and large, and much of the product that we are consuming in Colorado is being sourced from around the world. And that relationship, we're guesstimating around 11 billion at wholesale prices of Colorado manufacture goes out of the state or out of the country. 2.2 billion, according to Colorado Department of Agriculture estimates, leaves the country. Now let's look at the relationship between the farm sector and the processing manufacturing sector. Colorado farms and ranches at farm gate value are putting out about $4 billion worth of good that moves on down the value chain to the manufacturers. Now, there's a lot of farm gate value where the relationship, the buyer of the good is actually another operator in the farm ranch production sector. About $3 billion in feed grains, fodder, and live animals trade between farm operations. Add those together, about $7 billion worth of revenue in 2011, the last year we have numbers for. Upstream of the farm sector, Colorado-based ag businesses providing ag inputs are selling just about $2.5 billion worth of seeds, chemicals, energy, all the various inputs that you need to run a farm operation. And then the final piece, and really the defining factor of agricultural production, is the capital base that it utilizes, which is large amounts of land, open spaces, water. And we, of course, find that farms and ranches own a significant share of that natural capital, human capital, physical capital, genetic capital that they're utilizing, but they are also renting or utilizing and making about $1 billion in rental factor payments wages for the use of capital owned by others. That's either renting land or that's hiring labor or something of that nature. Now, to most neoclassical economists, we'd be done with this at this point. But there's one more very important piece of value that I want to point out in this flow chart, and that is a large share of value that we label as the non-market value of open spaces or ecosystem services. This is the intrinsic valuing that the citizens of Colorado have for what agriculture delivers to them, for which there is no market-mediated relationship. And that covers quite a wide span of various aspects, but it really is the economic driver behind the Open Spaces program that you have here in Boulder County. It's the desire of the citizenry to look out of their window and see open space as opposed to seeing somebody else's, back of their garage or something, right? And there's many other manifestations of that valuation as well. Let me now move you through a few observations, maybe a few surprises that we got when we put this whole analysis together. The reality of the retail that we engage in as consumers, our total retail sales, I told you, is $27.5 billion. The blue section of this band, this sort of rainbow bar, this is a graphic interpretation of where we spend our consumer dollars. And all of those shades of blue are our food purchased for consumption at home. Of the $12.3 billion that we purchase as Coloradans, about $8 billion of those purchases are at the 6 big retailers. And the largest of those 6 is Walmart, with a very large share of that. The smallest of those 6 is, in fact, Whole Foods. The bright blue band there at the far right-hand side of that bracket is Whole Foods. Food away from home is $13.9 billion, and you'll note that our away from home consumption is actually greater than our at-home consumption in the state of Colorado. Of our away from home consumption, $5.8 billion is at full-service restaurants. The other 2 are fast food and other kinds of food establishments. Alcoholic beverages, almost $3 billion. Yes, we're boozers. And that's at home and away from home, not too far off of national averages, in fact. And then over here we've got pet food at $180 million. We've got garden center and landscaping retail at about $1.2 billion. And you can't hardly see it there, but there's a little red sliver wedged right in there. That is the locally grown and branded as grown local sales at $88 million, just to give you context for where that is in the grand scheme of things. Wholesale is a very big deal in the state of Colorado, largely because of our role as a hub for the Rocky Mountain West around Metro Denver. Over 1,000 companies are engaged in food or wholesale somewhere within this value chain, 20,000 jobs in Colorado. It's the highest average wage in all of the sectors of the food system at $58,000 a year here in Colorado. And it weathered the downturn wonderfully, and even in 2012 was seeing a 6% job growth. We feed the world out of Colorado, and as I told you, of the $13.3 billion that we produce at the producing or manufacturing level, $2.2 billion is estimated to be exported from the U.S., $6.3 billion goes to the other 49 states, and about $5 billion is consumed or sold here in the state of Colorado. Now, you all know it in your heart of hearts. Colorado, really, looking at it from the grand scheme of things, is a state of beef and beer. These are our 2 biggest manufacturing sectors. Marketing's of beef cattle, live animals at $3.1 billion. Next step down the value chain, animal slaughter and meat packing is a $3 billion industry. Beer is a $4 billion industry. We don't have very easy way to trace up the value chain to the value of the water, the barley, the hops, and the other inputs to beer brewing, but it is creating a significant clustering. Our revenues from livestock sales in Colorado, beef really is king when it comes to livestock at $3.1 billion. Hogs are all the way down there at $233 million, and sheep and wool, $115 million. I don't really know where that old, cowboy versus sheep farmer, rivalry mythology came from, because this looks pretty imbalanced to me. Dairy, very up and coming in the state. In fact, over the course of the 10 years for which we have data, it grew from 200 million at farm gate value to 600 million. It's a tripling of the revenues to the dairies. And then our manufacturing, almost 2 billion. Of that, cheese is 1.2 billion. And of that, it's almost all one company. That would be Leprino Foods out of Denver, with a very large operation in Greeley. Our cattle and calf inventory in the state is spread out pretty unevenly across counties. I just wanted to give you a feel on where Boulder stacks. There you are. Weld County has more than double the next biggest county, but there's a lot of cowboy counties out there in a cowboy state. One of the upshots of having so many live animals in the state is that we need to feed them. We do grow a lot of corn, wheat, and other fodder, feed crops. Feed costs are going way up, from 25% of livestock producers' total costs over a decade ago to now more than a third. The value of farm sales of feed product is up 3x, but we've had a persistent deficit of feed in the state of about 100 to 200 million a year over the last decade. That's what you see graphically over here. And that means that we routinely are bringing in by the millions of bushels grain from Kansas, Nebraska, and other neighboring states. Revenues from our crop production in Colorado, you can see grains and fodder, sugar crops, oil seeds, fruit and vegetables. The one common theme here is that they are all bent upward. And most of you who are producers know that commodities have had a good run here, and that's the main driver of this. The grains are the big driver. We've got corn, wheat, and hay on the left panel. But really all of these, even lowly fruits and vegetables there, has seen a doubling, almost tripling over the decade. One thing I'll point out, that on-farm production at 2.9 billion, almost 3 billion, the organic share of production, this is halfway back through the time series in 2007, the last year we have numbers for, is only 19 million out of that. So do the math, see what the percentage is. There's a lot of room for growth. This is a interpolative satellite imagery of the state. Gives you a sense of where the crops are grown around Colorado. The brown is wheat. The gold color is corn. The other various colors are the distribution of other crops. The gray are the urban areas. Darker green, of course, is the mountain evergreen coverage, and the lighter green is the plains grassland coverage. But as you can see, it's very heterogeneous. There's no one pattern that is repeated everywhere, like you might see in Iowa or somewhere. Each state, or each county within the state, has a fairly idiosyncratic cropping pattern, and therefore that has very important implications for how we might manage it. The pink on there is alfalfa and hay, and you can see it mostly follows the river bottoms, whether it's the South Platte or the Arkansas. If we look at alfalfa and hay production by county, 2 years ago, 2012, there's Boulder in the lineup. Again, Weld County leads us all. Winter wheat, Weld County leads. There's Boulder's winter wheat production, 2012. Sugar beet, Boulder's at least one of the handful of counties that has sugar beet, but again, not a large player there. Greenhouse and nursery crops, 250 million on farm, 1.3 billion retail. It's suffered a bit of the real estate production downturn, as you can see, peaked out in 2008 and has been kind of on the skid since then. But still, at 250 million is a reasonably respectable crop all by itself. Input costs of farming have been going up over the same period, so it doesn't mean full-on profitability for everybody, depending on your exposure to input costs. The value of the capital that we utilize in agriculture at the scale of land and water. I'd like to visit that for a second here. We employ 31 million acres in ag production each year. Of that land, just over 2/3 are owned by the operators that work it, and we've got fairly good numbers from the county taxes and the records that are being kept for those, that fair market sale values estimated around $35 billion for that asset base of our farm sector. The other 1/3 are rented, and our best estimate is that the rental payments are about $93 million a year. What about the water? Well, we divert 13.8 million acre-feet of water a year. Now, most of that water gets diverted 2 or 3 times, and it's moving, through one field, runoff, back into the waterway, gets diverted again. So that's not consumptive use, that's diverted water. Our estimates are that ag operators have title to the paper, the water rights, to about 88% of that, and very broad band around it, but our sense is that the water asset value is probably something on the order of about half of the land asset value in the state. Here in the Front Range, it'll be more because there's competing markets, there are competing buyers for that water, and it's location, 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 just like in land markets. Stuff's heavy, hard to move around. About $40 million a year, though, is being rented. About 12% of the ag water is rented. Agricultural land values by county in the state well dominates by more than double the next. Boulder's in the middle of the pack, and that's going to be a function both of the amount of land that you have available, but also the per acre value of it, which isn't just productivity, it's also the value of alternative sales of that land. And when you're in the urban corridor, you've got higher bid prices for that. To summarize, I'd like to visit a couple of these core objectives from the Colorado Blueprint Plan that Kathay mentioned. The first of them that I want to visit briefly was the core objective to build a business-friendly regulatory environment. And in the business of agriculture, one of the key patterns in the data that leapt out at us that we think is very important for us to consider when making state and county and even municipal level regulations that are going to impact producers and folks up and down the value chain is to understand the lopsided nature of scale in this industry. What I have represented for you here is the 5 categories of producer as assessed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Across the bottom axis of this graphic, I've lined up from the highest gross revenue farm all the way to the lowest, the 38,000 operations in the state. And I've binned them into 5 bins. And the height of the bar for each bin is the average revenues for the farms in that size. So the metric going this direction is how many of them are there, and the metric going up is how much do they bring in each year on average. And what you can see is that there's a smallish cadre of very significant operations. In fact, it's 1,500 operations in the state that earn over $3 million, or bring in gross revenue over $3 million a year, and they account collectively for 80% of the on-farm production, which on the one hand sounds very dominant. On the other hand, to county commissioners and others in the room, I'd ask, is a $3.25 million a year business a corporate? Is that corporate agriculture? Is that domination by corporations? No, it's not. A $3.25 million business in downtown Boulder would be considered a smallish business. So you need to keep that in perspective. But on the other hand, also keep in this perspective that you've got this long tail effect going on in the industry where you've got literally thousands of very small operators who are going to be affected very differently by regulations than those big operators and be able to respond differently. Next core objective, the Colorado brand. We were asked to comment on how the agricultural industry can contribute to the broader perception of Colorado as a state and as a brand. And we, in fact, have a lot of advantages in terms of what products we're bringing to the market and how we are perceived around the country and around the world. And I would just underline that that food and agriculture and beverage may be able to play a pivotal role in establishing our image as a brand and a destination for healthy and active lifestyles. And I think that'll resonate quite a lot because of my next comment, which has to do with recruiting, creating, and retaining food and ag businesses in the state. And what I want to draw on, or what I want to comment on here, what we saw in the data was that we've got lots of good land and water, we've got good transportation infrastructure, we have quality of life. People want to move here, and that means we have a high-quality workforce. We've got a good pioneering business culture, but I think where we really want to focus on is leveraging our natural concentrations of excellence that we have within Colorado. And in agriculture, we notice 4 clusters, as it were, within the industry. And the first one I'll point out is the Northern Colorado South Platte River Commodity Crop and Livestock Cluster. This is basically Weld County, Morgan County, Sedgwick County, all the way out to the border, the South Platte River. This is where all the cattle live. This is where the bulk of the corn is grown and the feed is produced. And there are very large companies operating in this sector. The next is the one that Kathay made her aha moment in, and that is the San Luis Valley. And the fact that there is a natural agglomeration going on down there, and you can even see it in the satellite imagery. The third is on the western slope, and that's the fresh fruits and vegetables. Colorado wine country is growing up there real fast. The fourth, and you might be comforted to know this, but we're definitely fingering what we will call the Northern Front Range Natural, Organic, and Local Foods Cluster. And this hails all the way back to Celestial Seasonings and Horizon Organic Dairy and some of the other businesses that started a couple decades ago or more, but have continued to grow and flourish what is literally an industry cluster. And it's centered here in Boulder and Broomfield, and it's further down the value chain primarily. It's more food manufacturing, but it has serious implications for your conversation today. The last piece that I'd like to point out concerns the core policy objective for innovation. And I contend, based on what we saw, is that geography may be in our favor again and hold a key to innovation in food and agriculture, because we have, again, a natural proximity and concentration of a number of things. We've got ag production and processing facilities here up and down the Front Range. We've got research institutions, including my own and these guys over here next door. We've got the USDA, we've got the Energy Institute in Golden, a number of things. Very innovative food product development ag technology companies. We've got top talent, as I've already noted. We have a discerning consumer base, and I think some of the folks in the room today are coming at it from that angle. But these are all the elements needed for what we would call an innovation-led industry cluster. To assess this, we did a quick and dirty analysis initially of patents at the U.S. Patent Office in food and agricultural technologies. And we looked geographically within the state, where are they located? And that's what those red dots show. That's where the inventions are coming from in Colorado in food and agriculture. And it's an incredibly tight clustering, really Denver and north. I'm going to skip this one in the interest of time. An industry cluster, Michael Porter at Harvard Business School calls this a geographically proximate group of interconnected companies and associated institutions in a particular field linked by various commonalities and complementarities. And Navi Raju basically points out that you get different things happening when businesses are co-located than you would if they are geographically scattered. Digging a little bit more deeply into this, we've got a new study that's going to be coming out in the next couple of months in which we are really trying to profile this innovation going on inside the Front Range corridor, of which your community is a major player. These are the kinds of technologies that we see emerging and how they are growing, and you can see after year 2000 they've all taken off. Ag production technologies are the largest thing being innovated. But biotech, loosely interpreted, life sciences for crops, for veterinary, and for energy. Food and beverage manufacturing technologies in purple is growing, not quite as rapidly. Water technologies are growing, but the one coming from behind has been bioenergy. And that's not just corn-based ethanol. We've got some incredibly exciting second-generation biofuel research going on in the Front Range. If we take that, an updated version of that data set and we plot it on the state of Colorado, there's where the inventors are. And you've got 9 counties here in the Northern Front Range, 2/3 of the population, 11% of the area, 12% of the farmland. That farmland generates 30% of the value of ag production. 51% of the value of ag inputs comes from this region. Half of the ag inputs are sold from our Front Range counties. For the entire state, 81% of the value of commodity marketing and processing. So we are in a very interesting situation here. And I would venture that it's the innovation that we are poised to foster and make grow over the course of the next generation, which is potentially the key to the future of agriculture and the broader value chain, particularly right here in the urban corridor north of Denver. With that, I'm going to seal it off. Further comments, Kathay, to complete?
If there's questions, if there's not questions, I do have a comment. Okay. One of the interesting things, and we skipped the slide in time, but one of the interesting things we found, and I used the 3-generation example. From my generation to the next generation, my generation owns the water, the land, and the energy. From my generation to the next generation, there's $1 trillion in wealth that has to transfer. Now, if you think about that, and then you understand, I always use my husband as an example. My husband thinks a cell phone is a communist plot. He really does. So if you give him $1 million, he's going to go buy cows or invest in land. The technology that Greg talks about, the companies that are amazing need that venture capital. But if you don't have someone to bridge that understanding, someone from the agriculture community to understand the investing, understand how you would invest money in your own industry, whether you invest in land or cattle, if you're investing in your ag innovation industry, you're investing in your industry. So just a quick example, I was in the San Luis Valley, I was down at Otero Junior College, made that statement. One of the gentlemen that was there is an old friend of mine, had a big ranch. He really wasn't there to talk to me, he was there to yell at the commissioners, which, you know, I'm like, okay, well, yell away. So I left and he called me and he said, how much money do these young people need? I'm like, well, let me pull over here because this could be a longer conversation than I thought. He said, I have no children. La Junta is burning. We're in a drought, and I was going to look in Torrington, Wyoming. I want to invest in the industry. So he is now working with young people down there in innovation. So instead of taking someone like me who has some discretionary income, you put $1 million in a shopping mall and don't know what to do with it, you invest in your industry. So the young people can be in their industry without having to own the land and the water, but they can be in that industry and have that long-term pride and be able to speak that language. So.
Help me thank them before we do Q&A. Good job. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Okay, we have a series of questions here for you, and I'm going to ask with the mic and then back away. So I think this is pointed towards Greg. With the Northern Front Range Innovation Cluster, how should we get those business elements to work together?
Great question. How should we? How can we? I'm always cautious of, as an economist, we're trained not to be too normative in our languaging. And so I always start by looking at how are they, what is happening, and then maybe start to develop some shoulds or coulds, some normative ideas, some policies. One of the very important characteristics, if you look at this image that probably provoked your question, whoever it was, is that given the geography, we have a very interesting overlapping or juxtaposition of these two industry, what I called industry clusters, the large commodity livestock. But Weld County out there is growing a little bit or a lot of everything, and it's a 10, 15-minute drive from here. This juxtaposition of some of the most efficient and most large-scale agricultural production in the country and some of the most innovative, consumer-focused, value-added manufacturing and food product development going on in the country really, I think, have enormous opportunities in starting to talk to one another and starting to share best practices, and especially around the innovation. These larger companies, JBS is putting about for ways to reduce their carbon footprint, for ways to increase the value delivered to the final consumer. All the same kinds of challenges that organic producers and organic food manufacturers are also looking to do. And so there are a lot of lessons that can be shared and learned across this, what otherwise may be conceptualized as a cultural divide within the industry. So I would say that, to be provocative, that is one of the biggest ones that we should start to entertain. And especially with producers of, in the room here in Boulder County, you're in a perfect position to be bridge people in that cultural conversation and in the innovation in terms of building the value chain out around new product categories, new product offerings. I think that's incredibly important.
We got a whole series of these. We got a lot of Q&A time, so here we go. Here's our next question. Somewhat related, how do we establish a policy that makes growers go organic?
You want me to deal with that? That's a political question. Okay, so let me just hearken back to a land use hearing I had 15 years ago when someone said, how do we continue to make that farmer grow that corn because that's my view? You can't do it. You'll ruin the market, A, but what you can do, and this is an interesting conversation. I worked on the open space sales tax. I was a commissioner, I was on the Open Lands Board, I was on the Planning Commission. The conversation about how do you incentivize, how do you make ag your partner, how do you take a really talented farmer who is growing something and you recognize you really need this in your supply chain, or you've identified it and you need to find out. One of the big reasons that they grow what they grow is because it works. And they can get a profit from it. Sometimes it gets hailed out, there's crop insurance, but when you look at that, how do you look at some of the money that comes off of open space or comes off of the desire? And money is really spent because of a desire. Open space was passed in Larimer County by 66%, the highest percent of anything. And when you look at that, how do you spend that desire money? So if you have an excellent farmer, a long generational farmer who is growing something, pumpkins, because it works, if you look at a policy that says we're going to take a certain percentage of this and for 5-year test time we're going to guarantee you a return. We're going to give you an opportunity to be our partner and we're going to take as much risk as you are. We're going to say if it fails, if you get hailed out, we share the risk. If it's a success, we learn from it. If at the end of 3 to 4 years we recognize this is an incorrect crop for the supply chain we're trying to get, we talk to you about how we adjust that. You have the talent here, you have, as Greg said, that long tail. Those are the seed bed of innovation. My family's a great example. You start with 10,000 acres and then you have kids. And then so you divide it. And then you have kids again. So you end up with small areas that get very, very hard to do something on. So the incentivizing in policy creates the desire that people spend their money for. I want that to stay open, or I want a certain crop, I want to see my community grow. Incentivize that as much as we've incentivized the creation of the conservation easement, which when I first went into Larimer County was the only option to agriculture. There were 2 options. And thank goodness the open space tax across the state passed because we were growing enormously fast. Big bank account was development. It was quick, it was easy, it was on the table. Most ag people do not want to stop farming. They don't. They don't wake up one morning and go, gosh, I'd like to see 300 houses right there. That's what I want. But the options were nil. So to be able to have that option, and now we've managed to protect this land, and now let's keep these farmers that are there and let them help us and begin to become dependent or codependent or synergistic on each other. It allows the historical knowledge that farmers and ranchers have to be coupled with the technology, coupled with the desired money, and really create a community, and that's the policy side.
I would like to just add to that is that this is part of being innovative as an industry. It's not just coming up with new gee-whiz technologies, new genetics, new monitors for animal health or things like that, but it's coming up with new models of how we govern our land, of how we share risk, of how we finance things up and down the value chain. And again, if you look at that map, you quickly realize that we've got something of a natural experiment going on here. You're not going to have this kind of confluence of pressures from urbanization, from competition over water and over land, very much conflicting desires and conflicting norms as to what we should do with the resources that we have. It's wrestling with these issues and coming up with workable solutions that is some of the most important innovation that we have to make in this industry. And then once we have, ironed out at least somewhat workable solutions here, you know what? There's going to be people all over the country and all over the world that are going to come knocking on our door and saying, how did you guys in Boulder County figure that one out? Because you know what? Over here in Salt Lake City and the Utah Valley, we've got the same problem. Here in California, we've got the same problem. Here in Karachi, Pakistan, we've got the same problem on the Swat River Valley. How did you do it? How can we do it? So this is a very important calling, I think, for us to really take seriously and figure out.
Okay, data set question. Why are the most recent organic numbers from 2007? Why no more current studies? 6-year-olds info seriously misrepresents current reality.
This data is not easy. And it is the detailed data at the county level in particular is collected once every 5 years by the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the Census of Agriculture. Now, how many of y'all have filled out your Census of Agriculture from 2012? Well, that was the last one that was taken. The numbers aren't out quite yet. They're taking their time, I guess, in terms of processing, and by the time they're finally out, maybe they'll be old too, I don't know. But that's what we're really waiting for. There are some private surveys of organic agriculture done, and I'm sure that the speakers coming later in the day are going to be able to fill you in on some other numbers as well. It's the nature of the intensity of the data collection. It has been growing rapidly, but my main purpose for sharing the number with you that I did was so that you contextualize it within where we've been, at least within the last decade, so you've got kind of some bearings and understand that it's on the order of 1% or even smaller. Of course, it's going to vary by sector. So there's a lot of room for growth there. But on the other hand, I don't want you to walk into today's conversation with a contextual sort of preconception that it's something like 50% of U.S. agriculture. It's not on that order of magnitude.
Next.
All right. Let's go. Here we'll test your ag economics crystal ball. Feed cost went from 25% to 37%. Feed cost peaked in 2011. Do you foresee feed cost returning to normal 25%? Maybe a Norm Dahl's.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a normal to return to. The markets are constantly evolving. My sense of this, and I'm not the right guy to be asking this to. I would push it down the hallway to one of my colleagues who does more of the forecasting, Stephen Kuntz, on this particular one. My gut is that it's never going to go back to where it was. But on the other hand, if productivity picks up and herd sizes continue to stay smaller, maybe. I guess maybe is the crystal ball answer.
So we know that water drives much of the discussion that we're having. This is a insightful water question. Can you speak to the projected shift of 300,000 to 500,000 acre feet of water in the South Platte Basin being shifted from agricultural to municipal use by 2050? Maybe those numbers are off, but that generalized water pressure. and
What's
shift.
the essence of the question again? What's the impact of it?
Speak to the projected shift. What would that do? I think is the essence is due to the ag and food system as we see water shifting out of agriculture, the water market pressures.
Can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
a little bit, because I think one thing that Greg may have showed you is that we have in trying to figure out the value of water, we have a $6 to $20 billion delta. I mean, getting people to actually report water and talk about what they use and the reuse and the sub-irrigated water is very difficult. Colorado Water Institute is working on this all the time, trying to figure out how you really value that. However, when you look at that conversation, I think it goes back to the comment that Greg made. Right now, there are a lot of people working in the water industry in the innovation. How do you use less? How do you promote more? How do you actually use that water in a better way? And I think the conversation, when they started the Basin Roundtable conversations, I sat on that first Basin Roundtable where everybody walked in with their arms folded, and this is what it looked like. I'm not talking, and you can't talk about my water. And I think we have moved towards, let's at least talk about how we use the water. So I think it goes back, in my mind, to the innovation part. How do you innovatively bring your folks that, and it may not be your farmer, it may be your cities and municipalities that own that water. How do you bring them in to see that that water really allows them to grow the vision that they have put together for their region? So that's part of the innovation. The technicality is having the conversation. You know, the easy part is saying we should all get together. The hard part is having that facilitated conversation. And that's where everybody has to be at the table.
We'll squeeze in one more question here, and we have some very deep thinkers in the audience. This is a great political economy question that you guys are so lucky to be on stage to field this one. So challenges. Okay, here we go. How big is the chemical input economy, and how hard will they fight to maintain that? Second part. Can the organic economy supplement that stability enough to succeed?
Yeah, I'll take that on. I do a lot of research on agricultural inputs. They will fight, absolutely. And in fact, I'll throw a teaser out there, and you can have me back to really explicate this one sometime. But to me, the whole struggle over GMOs is in part a manifestation of how hard the chemical industry will fight a new technology coming on. Because GMOs threaten the chemical industry just as much as organics does, because lots of growers are switching out of using pest control methods that they did a generation ago and moving into GMOs, and that shifts who earns the dollar on the pest control. So that's a big part of the political economy of the chemical industry. Now, understand organics is a very complex business model. It's what we call in economics a product differentiation. You're selling a differentiated product. It's a different product that has a different quality in the eyes of the consumer, and the consumer is willing to pay a bit more for that. Now, organics will make good money doing that as long as there is willingness to pay in the consumer population for that. And so ultimately, the organic industry is really, it's being responsive to the demands of the consumer, and that is ultimately going to be the determinant, I think, that's going to drive the politics here. But it's going to be a fight.
I'll add one final comment, and then first of all, I want to thank you all for your attention and your questions. I think they've been really telling. We get amazing response from this from all over the place. But what I will say about the chemical industry, and I'm going to go back up to what Adrian introduced as a 30,000-foot conversation, and just get cold and down and dirty. Chemical industry wants to make money. These companies are looking at how they thrive and survive in the next 10 years. They want innovation. They want to know how they might be part of that conversation. It isn't a zero-sum game. So within multiple companies, energies, chemicals, all these companies, you can bet they have a research and development team that is saying, wow, this is where they're heading. We need to be in that space and have the smartest people there. So that's a very high-level finesse to reach into that industry and say, let me talk to your research and development. How can we partner so that we can all kind of go down the same path? That's to share the same fate. Because the no alternative to large companies, regardless of what they are, is you're out of business. The easy way is to say, how do we work in this innovation space toward the same goal, even though we may be, we may not actually cross those paths until 2025. But let's not work opposite of each other. And I think that's a wonderful time to go to your companies and say, this is our dilemma. How do we help?
Help me thank Kathay and Greg.